Isn't that life? Aren't you excited? I mean, today is the very last week of the series Breathing Room, which means the last time we have to put up with that video. I don't know about you, but I get stressed out just hearing like, okay, let's pray and we'll have a great day. Jesus, we love you. Anyway. Hey, we're so glad that you're here today. My name is Scott Johnson, and I'm the lead pastor here at North Tarrant Church. And today, like I just shared, we are finishing off the series entitled Breathing Room. And I don't know about you, I don't know where this series has landed in your own life or in your own rhythms of life, but it has been a series that has stirred some pretty cool conversations. It's been a series that I've heard from countless individuals that it has stirred conversations at the dinner table, the lunch table right after church, and it's stirred conversations within your work, it's stirred conversations within your family. It's been pretty fun to hear the stories of how this simple idea of having breathing room in our life can be valuable. Now, if you're new here today, or maybe this is your first time here in a couple of weeks, when we do series, we like to take a series and we do like an entire message over 4, 5, 6 weeks. And so you're getting the very end of the series today. And so congratulations. If there's anything that you're like, what did I miss? We've got the hookup. If you go to northtarrant.org/breathing room or findbreathingroom.com, either one, you can be caught up to speed. You can get our podcast. You can get the videos of what we've been talking about. And you can also get discussion questions if you want to process what we're talking about in a circle. Because we do think that there's value in communicating, in talking, in discussing what God's teaching you in a circle. Now, before we go any further, I want to just pause for a second, hit the timeout button, because I want to share with you some pretty cool news about us, about this place, about what God's doing in and through you. We've been in the process of talking about breathing room for a couple of weeks, and one of the reasons is because I think it is so valuable as a culture, so valuable as individuals, as Christ followers, if we are able to carry the momentum, if we're able to be the ones with breathing room, if we're the ones who, in the midst of financial catastrophe, we're the ones who have the breathing room to say, watch. In the midst of a busy culture where busy is the MO, if we're the ones who have the breathing room that cause the questions, who have the neighbors who say, you're always out front with your kids. How? You're always taking your wife on a date. How? We believe that we should be, as followers of Jesus, the ones on the forefront. In fact, one of the things that we are constantly talking about here, there's 2 questions we ask pretty regularly. First one is this, what is the faith of the next generation worth? We love that question, and here's why we like that question, because we are creating a church that one day we're going to hand off to the next generation. And we want to ensure that the next generation is poised and ready to take the baton and go further, faster, and do more than we could ever imagine. But the second question we ask pretty regularly around here is, how do we help people take next steps? And that is a question that we're constantly evaluating, because we believe as a church that we want to help people grow in their relationship with Jesus Christ. We want to lead people into a growing relationship. We want to lead people into taking steps, not create this ethereal, this is where you need to go, and good luck. That's why this series has been so impactful, because it has really given you handles around next steps. And so as we've been processing, this has been a year and a half process as we've been trying to think through, what does this look like? What does this look like as an organization? How do we continue to create spaces that allow the next generation to own their faith? And how do we create spaces for you as individuals, as adults, no matter where you're at in your life? How do we create spaces for you to take a step? A couple months ago, we began a conversation with Keller ISD. Betty Perot has been a beautiful facility, but we continue to ask questions about what could be and what is next, and how do we continue to find avenues to answer these 2 questions, not necessarily answer them, but manage the tension and set us up to succeed, set us up not just to be a big church, but set us up to make a big difference. And we are beyond excited to share with you that beginning at the end of August, we are going to be uprooting our organization and moving a mile south to Vista Ridge Middle School, which is right at the intersection of 35. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. It's been a fun journey as we've been in this process talking to Keller ISD and saying, hey, we love Betty Perot, but what could be? I mean, I've had conversations with our upstreet leaders as they're talking about trying to engage a fourth grader with a crying baby in the background. I don't know if you've ever tried to deal with either one of those, but putting them both in the same room is not ideal. I don't know if you've been able to experience what our Wombaland goes through every week as they take the Wombaland kiddos and they walk all the way down the hallway. We want to create a space where our Wombaland is secure, safe, and is all in the same space, where we can move our upstreet kids into their own environment where they don't have to worry about competing noises, but they also get the chance to have a leader that loves them and cares for them and has their undivided attention. We look forward to creating spaces where all of us have the opportunity to engage in the conversation that we started as a service. If you've ever been out in our atrium, especially Easter and different times, I've heard it's Grand Central Station. Like it's, I got to get out of here. We want to create breathing room for our organization as we answer these two questions. What is the faith of the next generation worth? And how do we lead people to take next steps? Can I just tell you, I am beyond excited. This is incredible. It is crazy. It has been an opportunity that we've been evaluating and thinking about what is next, what is next. We want you to take next steps. We don't want to be hypocrites. We need to be processing next steps as an organization as well. And can I tell you, we are beyond ecstatic to have you helping us, sacrificing greatly, inviting crazily, stepping up and helping us create a space for North Tarrant Church to pass the baton off to the next generation and to help your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues, your coworkers take next steps in their relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, just so you know, there's a couple dates I want you to throw out at there. August 26th, we are going to have preview service number 1 in the new facility. Kind of exciting. September 2nd. It's going to be preview service number 2. Now you're asking why preview services? Well, because Labor Day is right there. And so we don't want to be like, hey, we're open in Labor Day like everybody's at the lake. I mean, I want to be at the lake too, all right? So if you have a boat and you want to invite me, I'll come, all right? Well, Doyle, have fun with this operation. I'm seeing you later, right? But then I am excited because on September the 9th, we are going to be kicking off the fall. We're going to have some food trucks around. Not only that, but we're going to begin a brand new series entitled Who Needs God? One of the most pivotal series that I have ever experienced, and something that I know, regardless of where you land on the faith spectrum, it will challenge and it will encourage and it will leave us asking a lot of really good questions. So get excited. Be praying with me. And get ready as we move our operation from this beautiful facility a few steps south to Vista Ridge Middle School. Now, like I said earlier, one of the things we've been talking about in this series is breathing room. How do we have breathing room? And just to kind of answer the question, what does breathing room looks like? For me, it looks like an atrium that has really high ceilings, and it's I'm sorry. For me, breathing room is essentially this. It is the space between our current pace and our limits. It's the space between our current pace and our limits. And we've all experienced how that gap continues to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Financially, we've seen experiences where that has been the case. Time-wise, we've seen experiences where that has become the case. For me, just to be completely honest, I love the opportunity of starting something from scratch. The opportunity to begin North Tarrant Church in our living room and to see where we're at today is beautiful. But I can't tell you how many times, and Alden, all she asks is just for a text message. Like, Scott, hey, tell me when you're coming home. But I don't like to send her that text message because invariably I've told her I will be coming home at a certain time, and it is always after that time. So if I send her the text message now, right, like she's going to know that, I need to expect another 15 minutes before you get home. So I don't text her, and then I get home, and I'm processing excuses in my head, right? Like, or maybe I made up some time. I don't know how you make up time, but But I don't know about you, but so much of our lives are spent dreading patience, dreading red lights, and ultimately trying to make something out of nothing. In the last several weeks, Andy's taught us, he's been challenging us to teach us to number our days, to teach us to put a gap between our current pace and our limits, to be able to go underneath the limit, not exceeding the limit, but to try to figure out how do we make the most of life. Because all of us have been in that scenario where we have just been inundated with work, we've been inundated with everything in life, and we just want to come home, you sit down, you pull out your phone, and you got that one email that you didn't want to read, and it just blows up in your face. You got that one message you didn't want to read, and all of a sudden, it's like, it wasn't that big. It could have just been, hey, there's a meeting on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, and you're like, and all of a sudden, all of the rage and the frustrations and the struggles all compile into that one simple message, and we blow up. We have a mess because our breathing room was so minuscule. One of the things we've been talking about this week this series is that life is better. We say better connected, but we love to try to challenge you in how we can make life better. And life is ultimately better when we have breathing room. Now, several years ago, in fact, 23 years ago to be exact, North Point Community Church began, and it began very similar to the way we began. It began with just a handful of people that were hungry, that were excited, that wanted to see something brand new in their community. And at the time, Andy was a pastor at his dad's church, and he was trying to figure out how do we make life work. Beyond that, he had the dream of creating an incredible organization that little did he know it would span all over the country. But in the moment, whenever he was diving into this, he understood the ramifications, not for the organization, but he understood the ramifications for his family. And one of the things I love is Andy, in those early days as he began to create North Point Community Church, he made some pretty critical statements, some pretty critical decisions that aren't just good from a pastoralship, but are incredibly wise regardless of where we find ourselves today. And so I've invited Andy, just kidding. Wouldn't that be nice? Come on out. Why are you up there? Anyway. To share the decision that he made and how he came to be, because I believe it will help us really solidify breathing room in our relationships. Andy?
Now, 17 years ago, we launched North Point. At that stage in my life, we had 2 kids in diapers, and Sandra was pregnant with our 3rd child. And for those of you who've ever launched an organization or begun something that you're excited about, it is extraordinarily time-consuming. One of the things that we did is we read a book together, our leadership team, by Michael Gerber, called The E-Myth, or The E-Myth Revisited. Some of you have read the book. It's a great book. And one of the things he recommends you do as an organization is that you create an organizational chart that represents how large you want your organization to ultimately be. And we wanted to create a church that was so big that would actually impact an entire community or perhaps an entire city. So the 6 of us sat down and we created this giant organizational chart. And then he said, now you put somebody has to put their initials in every single box in the organization so that everybody will know what they have to do, and then you work your way out of those boxes, which is a great strategy. Except at the end of the exercise, we all had our name in about 20 or 30 boxes, which meant there was a lot to do, but we were so excited. Meanwhile, I got 2 kids kind of waddling around as toddlers and a pregnant wife who I love dearly. And without much time going by, it suddenly dawned on me that there just wasn't gonna be enough time. There just wasn't enough time. I love my work, I love my family, but there just wasn't enough time. If I stayed at work until everything got done, I would never be home. If I stayed at home until everybody got their love tanks full and all my kids had I had their undivided attention, and Sandra had enough conversation time with me, I probably would never go to work. And then during this time, as we were kind of grappling with all this stuff, we had our 3rd child, and then we speeded up, our oldest child's potty training. I won't tell you about that in case you meet him someday. And then now we had one that was barely potty trained. Now we had 2 in diapers, and life was really intense at home. And some of you who are in that stage right now or can remember that stage, even though we kind of try to blank it out, you can remember, you remember that. And there just wasn't time. So when I'm at home, I'm thinking about work. When I'm at work, I'm thinking about home. And then to make matters worse, I just wasn't going to work. I was building the church. I was doing God's will. I was doing this thing that I felt called to do and impassioned about. And there was so much excitement and things were starting to grow, but things were very, very busy. Now, for those of you who've met my wife, the few of you, she is an extraordinarily capable person. In fact, years ago, we took a leadership test and she scored way higher than me in leadership. She is organized. She is efficient. She is the most get-it-done organized person. She has so much capacity. And so at this very, very, stressful time of our lives, she was just taking on more and more of the responsibility at home. And her heart was, you go build that church, and I'm going to cover the things at home. And I'm like, you cover things at home, and I'm going to go build the church. But there was a growing tension. And being in ministry, I knew the end of that story. And the end of that story, if you didn't do something kind of drastic, the end of the story looked kind of like this, a big mess. And I'd seen it happen not only in the lives of men and women who were in business, but I'd seen it specifically in the lives of men and women who were preachers and their children. Because in preacher's world, you have this idea that you're doing God's will. And so you pray a prayer that looks kind of like this: Lord, take care of things at home while I do your work and build the church. And it seems so glorious, and it seems so glamorous, and it seems so, right, and it seems so religious, and it seems so spiritual. And it just seems like God would answer that prayer, that God's gonna cover the bases and fill in the gaps at home while I go do his work and build the church. But I had talked to enough preachers and met enough preachers' kids whose lives were a complete mess, who walked away from the church and hated the church because they felt like their dad was married to the church, to know that something had to give in our life. And the other thing was this, and I don't want you to tell anybody I said this because this could be misunderstood, but if you are part of our network of churches or watch online, you're sophisticated enough to understand what I'm about to say. Just don't tell anybody else. Here's the thing. I didn't want a marriage where we were committed to marriage. See, when I don't know about you, when I got married, I didn't marry marriage. I married Sandra. And when she got married, she didn't marry marriage, she married me. And we didn't want our relationship to get to the point where we are committed to staying married. Now, I think people should be committed to staying married. But if that's all you got, it ain't no fun. Because everybody shows up committed to staying married. We're committed. Now, we're not enjoying it, but we're committed to stay in marriage. Now, I think there's a place for that. I just don't want to be in that place, is all I'm saying. I want her to love to hear the garage door come up, not look for something to do while she needs to be walking out the back door and hand me the kids and leave, okay? I didn't want it to get to that, all right? I wanted to enjoy coming home. I wanted her to enjoy me coming home. And it was getting to the place where I would show up at home and she was tired, and I felt like it was my fault, and she was trying to, carry a load. And anyway, things were tough. So finally, after months and months and months, and you just sort of feel that tension, and you have those hard conversations, and you're kind of walking on eggshells, and as a man, we just don't know what to do. And again, I'm at home thinking at work thinking at home. So finally, this culminated in one of the most important conversations we've ever had in our marriage. And I think this conversation actually resulted in the best leadership decision I've ever made. And in the conversation, I asked a question that I think she was afraid to answer. And I think one of the reasons we hadn't actually gotten the conversation to this level is because I didn't think she would want to tell me the truth, because she's trying to be a trooper and carry her weight. And I don't want to be complaining, and you're doing God's will. And I want to be able to carry the load. So finally, I asked her this question. I said, what does ideal look like? What does ideal look like? In other words, don't be afraid to tell me. I'm not going to think you're a whiner or a complainer, or that you're weak, or that you're not a good mom, or that you're not a good wife. Just tell me. In an ideal world, what would my schedule look like? In an ideal world, how would this work? I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if it's realistic, but I at least need to know, so that we don't continue to kind of do this dance around something that you're thinking and I'm thinking, and we're both trying to do our part, because it just wasn't comfortable. It just wasn't going in a good direction. Now, I'm going to tell you what her answer is in just a minute, but I want to talk a little bit about this tension. When we hand to our husband, our wife, our significant other, who it is, whenever we hand to our children a responsibility that they are not equipped to carry, it's like handing them a big rock. It's like, honey, I got to go to work, and I'm going to be gone a long time, and I'm going to be traveling more than normal, and I need you to carry a responsibility that I know belongs to me, but I need you to hold this for a while I do something else somewhere else. And we all know in life there are times, there are days, there are weeks, there might even be a short season where we have to say to our kids, mom or dad has to be gone. Mom or dad has to work a little bit harder. Mom and dad's gonna miss a weekend or two. Mom and dad's gonna miss a ball game or two. And so we hand our spouse or we hand, our kids this load. And this load represents a responsibility we should carry that we're expecting them to carry. And you know what happens when we hand it to them? They always accept it. Because after all, I want to be a good husband while you work. I want to be a good wife, while you travel. I want to be a good son. I want to be a good daughter. I know that daddy works hard. I know that mommy works hard. So yeah, dad, I know you're not going to be here for the ball game. I know you're going to miss that recital, but I understand that I can carry that load. Yeah, I'm going to miss you. Yeah, I wish you were there, but I can carry that load. And so they carry that load. The problem comes is when we leave them with that load and we never come and take it out of their hands. And time goes by, and time goes by, and time goes by. And they begin slowly to wear out. And there's a tension, and there's problems, and there's stuff going on. And we don't completely understand what it is. Here's how you know that you've handed that load off to somebody in your family. When you're constantly repeating promises to do better. Daddy's gonna do better. Mommy's gonna do better. Honey, I promise. Honey, I promise. Honey, I promise. I'm gonna do better. I know you're right. And they're crying and you're crying and you know you're wrong and you know you've done it again and you know you came home late again and you know you overscheduled again and you know that you prioritized somebody else over them again and you know you did it wrong and you promise and you promise and you promise and nothing changes. And you know how we justify this? Every once in a while we show up and we say, how's the rock? You doing okay with the rock? I know I've left you with that rock. Are you doing okay? Go, 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 go. You can do it. You can do it. We cheer them on. We think we've cheered them on. And here's some flowers. Okay, here's some flowers, Hey, I bought you a box of golf balls. How's it going? You holding that rock. And then we go back off to whatever it is that we're doing. The other way that you've handed it off is this. Chronically absent from important events. You miss another ball game, another recital. You miss another birthday. Oh, no, I'm going to be gone over our anniversary again. And the third way is you keep pointing to the future to make up for the past. It's gonna get better. Next year, next summer, next spring break, next Christmas, next Thanksgiving, next birthday, next time, I know I missed it this time, I know, but next time. When it's chronic, when it's repeated, when they just don't seem to change, when you're having the same conversations about the same things over and over and over, you have handed someone in your family a burden they were not meant to carry for very long. And then eventually, their mental willingness to carry your load is overcome by emotional and in some cases physical exhaustion, and they drop that rock. And it's so interesting when the rock drops in a family. For men, we look at the immediate event and say, what happened? All I said was pass the ketchup, and she just broke into a puddle of tears and ran out of the room. What is that? All I said was, I'm gonna be 5 minutes late. She hangs up the phone, I get home, she's not even there, and I haven't heard from her in 3 days. You know what happened? All I said was, honey, I might I might not get there till the end of the recital, and she was locked her room, and the music's loud, and she's not talking to me, and you're not, what? All I said was, all I did. And what we don't understand, it was one more coat hanger and a full closet, and it was the last one. And somebody dropped the rock. When the rock drops, grades plummet sometimes. When the rock drops, intimacy evaporates. When the rock drops, you tell your husband, look, I've got a trip, and this took me by surprise as well. And instead of seeing sorrow in his eyes, you think you might have just read, I'm glad you're going on another trip. It's better when you're not around. Now, if you haven't been there, someday you might be there. And there's nothing worse in a family than when the rock drops, because I hate to tell you this, even though I should bring you the good news. Sometimes when it drops, there is irreparable damage. Sometimes it signals the end of a relationship. Sometimes, even though most of the pieces can be put back together, it's a little bit like Humpty Dumpty. You can't get them all quite back together. And then sometimes it takes seasons and then sometimes years to bring about the trust that was lost. When you ask someone to carry a load that you were intended to carry, but because you had something else to do, you left it with them a little bit too long. Now, I understand why this happens. And part of the reason that this happens is this: we love progress. And in the marketplace and in the industry where you work or the world that I work in, we love progress. And when I go to work, I can measure progress, can't you? When I come home, I can't measure progress. There's no progress, I'm just home. If I stay at work for 2 extra hours, I get stuff done and I can put a check in a box and I can make a call and I can tell somebody I finished something. When I go home, I'm just home. Like most of you, I can't make any extra money at home. I have to be at work. At home, there aren't any awards celebrations. I've never gotten a trophy at home. Have you? I've never gotten a plaque at home. I haven't had everybody sit around and cheer when I walked in and bring me up and hand me something. There are no financial bonuses connected with being at home. You're just home. So I understand this, and I think this is the thumbprint of God on you. I think God, who loves progress in you and progress in the world, and think of all that God has created, this is the thumbprint of God. This isn't a bad thing. But when it gets out of control, when your desire and your quest for progress, whether it's growing something, building something, making more money, creating a name for yourself, whatever it might be, all of which are good things, when those things begin to compete with the fundamental things, with the essential things, and when you begin to cheat what is most important for the sake of something that's secondary, then there is a problem. So with all that as a backdrop and knowing all of that and having seen that in the lives of so many families, Sandra and I sit there and I say, what's ideal? What does ideal look like? And don't be afraid to tell me. And she said, well, at 4:00, I'm done. I'm just done. I don't have any energy. I got to start thinking about dinner with the 3 kids. I'm just by 4:00, no matter how disciplined I've been and how, all the things I try to do to pace myself, from 4:00 to 6:00 or 4:30 to 6:30, those are the worst 2 hours of the day. And Andy, that's when you show up. You show up at 6:00 or 6:30 and I'm done. And I try so hard and I just don't have it in me. And we had a great conversation. I said, so what's ideal? She said, could you come home at 4? And I was so glad she told me. And she just didn't want to tell me because she knew what a burden that would be. And so I made a decision. It was one of the toughest decisions I've ever made as a leader, certainly as a pastor, but I think it's one of the best leadership decisions I ever made. And as difficult as it may have sounded, there was part of this that made it kind of easy. And part of it is what I tell you every single week, week after week after week. I really believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God and that he died for our sins and that he actually rose from the dead. And I believe there were people who saw it, and I believe there were people who took his teaching and spread it around, and many of them wrote parts of what we would call the New Testament, which means we need to take the New Testament seriously. And in the New Testament, Peter, who hung around with Jesus a lot, and Paul, who spent a lot of times with his followers, said some very specific things about marriage. And I knew that for the rest of my life, beginning 17 years ago and even before, I would stand up in front of people and say, here's what the New Testament says about how you're to treat each other. Here's what the New Testament says about marriage. And I taught it and I believed it, and suddenly there was a brand new level of application that had come my way. Because I knew that the New Testament taught this. Check this out. We've looked at these verses before. Paul wrote this: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And this is the introduction to something he's about to say to me as a husband. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit means I place myself under. Submit means I'm going to put your deal above my deal. Submit says, Sandra, whatever you want, I'm going to try to do my very best to make sure you have what you want and what you need. You tell me what time, I'm going to try to figure it out. I have never been called as a man to submit myself to my career, even if my career is the local church. And therein is the tension. I've never been asked to submit myself to my desire to create a name for myself. I've never been asked to submit myself to the drive to make a lot of money or to build a big organization. But my heavenly Father, through those who knew his son so well, so I said, I'm to submit myself to a person. And then he goes right to the heart of the issue. He says, husbands, here's what it looks like to submit yourself to one another and to your wife. You love your wife as Christ loved the church. And then in case we didn't know exactly what he was talking about, he said, and you give yourself up as he gave himself up for her, as Christ gave himself up for the church. Husbands, so love your wives. How? As Christ loved the church, not as you think she deserves to be loved. Husbands, you love your wife as Christ loved the church. And what do we have to do? Well, you follow Christ's example and you give yourself up for her. You give up your ambition for her. You submit your desire for progress and all those good things that God has put in your heart to do for the sake of her. So in that moment, in that conversation, because I know these things, I've taught these things, I believe these things, I really do think there's traction and leverage to be had in these kinds of principles. I knew that I really didn't have any choice but to figure out a way to create breathing room in our marriage by placing Sandra ahead of my career, my job, which meant you, the local church. Now, I'll tell you what made it difficult. As much as I believed and as much as I loved her, and I didn't even have to do this out of reverence for Christ. It wasn't like, well, I don't really like Sandra, but I really like Christ, okay? So I'm gonna submit myself to her for the sake. Some of you may be in a marriage, you may just have to do it out of reverence for Christ because you've lost reverence for each other. And you know something? That's a good thing to do as well because you can regain reverence for each other when you begin to treat each other reverently. I mean, it works the other way as well. But fortunately, we hadn't gotten to this. Things were teetering, okay? Things needed a little propping up, but there hadn't been a disaster. And so I still loved my wife, and I thought, okay, if this is what it looks like to submit myself to you, I'm gonna figure this out. But I'll tell you what the obstacle was. The obstacle was what we talked about the first week in this series. And if you didn't watch the first one, you need to go back and watch the first one. Because we said the thing that wars against breathing room in our lives financially and in our schedule more than anything else, it's not discipline, even though sometimes it can be a discipline problem. It's not the amount of money, although obviously there are financial constraints. We talked about that last week. The issue for most of us when it comes to really creating breathing room is this word right here, fear. It's fear. It's fear of, but what if I don't? And what if I don't measure up? And what if I don't show up? And I'm afraid of what people might think, and I'm afraid of how people might interpret that, and I'm afraid of how that's gonna come across, and I'm afraid that people will read into that, and I'm afraid that they'll think I'm lazy, I'm afraid they'll think I'm not bought in, I'm afraid, and none of us want to admit we're afraid. But what drives the breathing room right out of our lives sometimes is fear. And in my case, I was thinking, how am I gonna go to these 5 employees that are working themselves silly and say, hey, I'm gonna leave every day at 4. Good luck, see ya, I'll be the first to go, follow me. And what happens when the people in the church find out about this? And what happens when I quit going to all these meetings and going to all these groups? And when I tell people I can't be there, I can't be there, I can't be there, I can't be there. Well, when can you come? I can't ever come because I'm not doing anything at night anymore. I'm gonna have our elders meeting once a month and our stewardship team meeting once a month, but I'm not gonna go to all these other things. When can you come? I can't ever come till our kids are grown. That's when I can come. When our kids are gone, I can come to your house. When our kids are grown, we can have lunch. When our kids are grown, we can have dinner. How do you say at the beginning of the launch of an organization, especially at church, categorically, no? No. What are they gonna say? Are they gonna keep coming? Are they gonna give? Is it gonna work? God, can you build a church if I'm not working 60 hours a week? Can you do that? Fear. And I remember sitting down with our staff, and there were 5 of them, and some of them had no kids yet, and some were right where we were, and some had older kids. And I said, guys, I feel lazy telling you this, but I'm leaving every day at 4. And if this bothers you, tell me now. If it bothers you in a month, tell me then. Well, this is an ongoing conversation, but this is the decision that I've made. And I would tell people, they'd say, hey, can you meet? I'd say, yeah, I'll meet you at 5. In the afternoon? No, in the morning. Sandra said, you can do whatever you want in the morning. I had mornings where I had 3 breakfasts. You sit in a restaurant and, okay, you have to go now because the next person's here, okay? So I'll meet you as early as you want, but at 4 o'clock, I'm getting up and I'm going home, it was so difficult. And so I remember one afternoon, driving home, I pulled off in a side street before I went home. It was just, right in the midst of this. And I kind of made a deal with God. And I don't recommend you make deals with God. I don't model this. I just didn't know what else to do because there was just so much pressure and just things to get done. So I said, God, and this sounds so silly now, 17 years later. I said, God, I'll tell you what, I can only give you 45 hours a week. I mean, we know that. And I'm not going to travel. And you need to know for the first 10 years of the life of our church, I got asked to do so many things and travel, but I couldn't even get everything done here. And so all the traveling was a no, just I don't travel. It would have been more money because people pay me to speak. I don't know why, but they do. And so I was just saying so, but I said, I'm not doing that. But God, I've only got about 45 hours. So God, will you build as big and as wonderful and as awesome a church as you can on my 45 hours a week? Because you and I both know that's all I got. And I will be satisfied with whatever you place in those 45-hour hands. I just had to settle that once and for all on my way home.
We are. Those 45 hours, they got us here. Little did he know that when he launched in Atlanta, that his reach would be changing the way people think about church across the country. It's fascinating. But I think there's a principle at stake, and I think there's something, because many of us in here, we're reading this and we're listening to this and we're thinking, yeah, I ain't telling my boss I'm leaving at 4. Like, you're a pastor, you can do that. But what about me? And I think there's something that's valuable that he made the comment early on. He said, Lord, take care of things at home while I'll do your work and build the church. But what if we changed that question just a little bit? Rather than, Lord, take care of things at home while I do your work and build the church, what if we made that more practical? Lord, take care of things at work while I take care of things at home. Regardless of where you're standing today, there is something that we can do. We're going to choose to cheat. We're going to choose to cheat somewhere, some way, somehow. But my question is this, is who are we going to cheat? When it comes to work, when it comes to the many hours that are demanded, and that's one of the things that I love, when it comes to creating this expression of the local church. We can sell our souls to try to create the biggest and the best and the baddest church in the world. But what does that do when it comes to genuinely making a difference? And when it comes to making a big difference in our culture, if we have created this big, crazy facility, but we've got just individuals who are going through the motions, who have no clout in the community, who, when they wear the shirt for North Tarrant, it's not simply a shirt that's about who we're for, but it's about how do I build a bigger, better building. What if we categorically lived out this prayer? For me, when I think about what does this look like, I know as the pastor of your church that there's going to come a day when somebody's going to take the reins from me. There's going to be a day when somebody takes your role. There's going to be a day when somebody looks at your responsibilities and says, I know how I can make it better. There are a few unique responsibilities that only you can hold. For me, it's being Alden's first husband. Now, she can get other husbands, but none are as good looking as this, right? Why are you laughing? But the second unique responsibility is the father to my children. And yet so many times the war on my time and the war on my energy and the war on my efforts are how do I make a better organization? And I can always, they've got to love me. They'll be around next year. This is just a season. This is just a time of my life. But what if we began to really invest in the unique responsibilities that you and I carry? And we were to decide that we're not going to trade the unique for something someone else will do. We're not going to trade my unique responsibilities for something someone else will do. Because life happens so quick. 2-year-old and 3-year-old, I even get that. Can't even imagine the 16, 17, 18-year-old parents of. as you begin to put your mind around, you begin to wrap your head around. I mean, as we were bringing kids into this world, I had so many people that said, hey, breathe it in because the time goes by so fast, right? The nights are so long, but the years are so short. And yet we blink, and next thing you know, life has gone by in an instant. So my question is this: are we willing to trade the unique responsibilities that you and I hold for things that somebody else will come down the road and carry forward? Are we willing to trade? It's just a season, it's just a time, and you can sit on the other side and say, Scott, you don't get it. Let me tell you my job responsibility. Let me tell you the demands. Let me tell you, there's people's lives that are on the line. But I wonder what it would look like if we began to trust God, that God will take care of it. While I take care of the things at home, I trust that God will take care of the things at work. I wonder if we were to live out the principle that Jesus, the command that Jesus gave more often than any other command, which was, fear not. But you don't understand, that'll come in a couple of years. But right now, this what Jesus would look at and say, fear not. I wonder what it would look like if you and I collectively, if we trusted God to take care of the things at work while we took care of the things that only you and I can take care of. Now that doesn't mean you go in tomorrow and you turn in your resignation letter and be like, it's all I can do. Your kids still need food. Just being honest. But there are things that we can do to be more efficient with our time so that we can be more effective in our relationships. There's things that we can do to be more efficient with the time that we have and more effective in our spectrum of influence so that we can be more capitalizing and more captivating when we're home. Here's where I want to land the plane. As a church, what would it look like if that was us? What would it look like if you and I, when we wear these 4 North Tarrant shirts, it embodied this idea of breathing room? That when people talk to you, they understood that you have their undivided attention. When your bosses are talking and saying, hey, we need this and this and this, I wonder what it would look like if your natural default was, let me check and see. Time out. I'm not asking you to get fired. But I wonder what it would look like if you and I, if we collectively lived lives with such breathing room that the community around us began to ask how. They began to say, you are the most generous individual. How do you still give? You seem to have so much time to help. How have you chosen to number your days to be so effective? Man, you love your spouse. What is it? What's the secret sauce? What if you and I, what if we lived with such breathing room that an outside unbelieving world were to look at you and say, I don't know what you have, but I want it. That's my prayer. Think about the difference, not the big church we could create, but think about the difference we could make as we wear these shirts proud and as we provide influence into a culture that is trying to find its way. God, we love you. And God, I thank you so much for the fact that you are a big God. And I thank you for the opportunities that are in front of us. God, I thank you for Andy's, Father, his bullheadedness to say, I am going to create a 45-hour-a-week church. And God, to see how you have honored his ability to stand strong in that. And even today in Fort Worth, God, several hundred miles away, we are here because of his influence. And God, I can't help but imagine the influence that is in this room. I pray that you would give us the courage to do what it takes, Father, to do what only we uniquely can do. And God, may we not trade breathing room. May we not trade the things that we can only do for something that is fleeting in the end. God, give us the courage. Give us the boldness. God, give us the opportunity to take a deep breath. God, we love you and we thank you. It is in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen.